All right, welcome to episode two of the 15-Minute Coffee Podcast with Brandon Salazar, your go-to destination for expert perspectives and valuable insights from the world of business. Today, I'm here with Kevin Lawton, the founder at the New Warehouse and an adjunct professor at Rider University. Before we get into the questions, I would like to thank Professor Lawton for being a guest on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Brandon.
All right, to start off, can you share a bit about your background and journey to becoming who you are today?
Yes, I can. It's been a interesting journey, to say the least. Certainly, was not what I set out to do or thought I would do. Earlier in my life, I guess would be the way to say it. But yeah, I mean, I went to school. I knew I wanted to have my own business at some point. I majored in entrepreneurial studies. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do or necessarily have a business idea when I finished with school. And I needed to get a job, and I ended up getting a job in the warehousing industry, focused in inventory control, was where I started. And then I slowly started to embrace that as a career within the logistics supply chain world, and worked for multiple different companies throughout that journey. But along the way, as I started to think that, yeah, this is going to be, a career. I don't know for my whole life, but at least for a little while, let me embrace it a little bit. Let me educate myself a little more on the industry and what was going on. And as I went to do that, I was not finding anything that was quite interesting or catching my attention as someone in their 20s would find. And so that's what eventually led me to start the New Warehouse, which is a podcast media company all about the warehousing industry. So I started the podcast 5 years ago, and in 2019, really started thinking about it in 2018, maybe a little bit in 2017. I was thinking about it, but more from like a blog standpoint, and then it kind of evolved into a podcast. So yeah, launched the first episode in 2019, and then was really a selfish need. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to network with more people, be able to connect with more people and talk to them in the industry, and just I guess figure out the industry more as well. And then it got some good traction, and yeah, 5 years later, we're still putting podcast episodes out there, and that's opened a ton of opportunities for me as well, through networking and being able to do different things. And then along the way, too, I had some experience working with SAP, and I got involved with ASCM, PRSJ, which is the Association of Supply Chain Management in the Princeton region, South Jersey, which I'm now the president of that chapter currently. But at the time, I got involved with them, and Brandon, as you know, you were my student, right? Not only do I teach at Rider now, but I'm also an alumni of Rider. So we had a relationship through that chapter with Rider University, and I really was interested in trying to make that relationship stronger. So I got involved with the students, and then also the head of the supply chain department at the time, Tan Miller. And through that, we just developed a connection, and there was a professor that was retiring, that was teaching a class that dealt with SAP. Tan or Professor Miller was familiar that I had some SAP experience, so he asked me if I'd be interested in becoming an adjunct professor. Something can't say that I ever really thought about before necessarily, but so I tried it, and yeah, now I think I'm in my sixth semester teaching now at Rider. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit of what's gotten me to this point. Just really, I guess the underlying part of that, if you were to have a takeaway from it, was just the overall kind of networking aspect, really, right? Having that vehicle to network, which was, through the podcast at first, which allowed me to do a lot of other things in my career and meet a lot of people that otherwise I probably wouldn't. And then through the ASCM chapter as well, those networking opportunities were able to lead me to the teaching.
Right, nice. So going on to question two, can you talk about a pivotal moment or decision that you in your career that significantly impacted your trajectory?
Yes. That's interesting. I think I go at it like two different angles. So like something maybe I guess tangible or physical that happened was certainly um when I started the podcast. I mean, I didn't realize it at the time, but if I reflect back, that's certainly something I think that was a pivotal moment in my career, which has led me to where I am now. The podcast, it started as just a podcast side hobby kind of thing, and is now like a full fledged business media company. I guess you would call it, and so that was certainly something that was pivotal, changed a lot of things for me. But I think another thing too, from like a mindset perspective, I had a boss who would consistently kind of ask us to dig deeper, right? And not just settle for an answer. And so I started to change my mindset a little bit in that way and got more curious, I guess you could say, and not afraid to ask like, why do we do things like this or why do we do things like that within the company? And as I started to do that more, I saw how that allowed people to open up a little more, but also create more understanding and see, processes and services and why things are the way they are and how to then take that and how can we make that better? Or how can we collaborate better through different departments, different parts of the business? And that's really kind of allowed me to see a lot of different things and have a lot of different opportunities that maybe otherwise I wouldn't have, right? If you kind of take at like face value and someone just says like, oh, that's something that we can't do, right? And if you're just like, oh, okay, and that's it, right? Then, like maybe you don't find out like why or have an understanding there. So asking that question why has certainly given me a lot of different perspective and a lot of opportunities to learn and develop even more.
Nice. So, so for question three, what are the key challenges facing supply chain management today, and how do you address them in your role?
Key challenges in supply chain management, man. There's many. I think supply chain right now is, I mean, it's always been there, but there's like a bigger spotlight on it now than there ever has been. Mostly because of the pandemic, and we all know what happened there around the supply chain, and supply chain has become a regular household term, you could say at this point. But I think some of the biggest challenges are as we look at um, trying to make that supply chain more resilient, is what you hear a lot out there. And trying to not only make it resilient in the sense that we have a lot of, um, we've addressed a lot of the challenges of if we have something that's disruptive, again, what's the contingency plan in a sense, right? And so if we look at, I focus mostly through my podcast and the business and what I've done in my career on the warehousing fulfillment side of things. So if we look at that, part of being resilient there is trying to work through a lot of the challenges with labor, and it's been getting a little better, but with the pandemic, it created a ton of challenges trying to get labor, trying to retain labor, and just, overall interest of people wanting to work in a warehouse is certainly declined a lot. I think, with you talk about a warehouse worker, you're talking about an hourly wage worker, and wages have certainly increased a lot since the pandemic because of some of those challenges of getting employees and retaining them. It's driven a lot of the labor rates up, but you still have opportunities out there where like you look at the gig economy. Well, if someone looks and says like, well, I can make the same amount of money um, driving Uber or doing DoorDash and probably be a little more comfortable sitting in my car, driving around for a couple hours a day versus, standing on my feet all day on a concrete floor, lifting heavy items and things like that. So, there's the types of jobs that are out there have certainly changed, which has taken a lot of that interest away from the manual labor type of jobs. I think people have realized, like, especially younger generations that are more like tech savvy, that, I can, be smarter about what I'm doing and not, uh, I guess maybe work as hard, but from like a manual perspective, right? So I think that's one of the big challenges. And I think from my perspective, the second part of your question, right, is, how am I helping to address some of that? And I think it's just around, if we look at the podcast, just around creating awareness of what does the warehouse look like these days? Where is it going to, right? I mean, the name of the podcast is The New Warehouse, right? So we talk about all things warehousing, but a lot of the conversations we have are focused on, what's this solution, or what's the newest solution? How is it addressing some of these challenges? And I think creating that awareness, which was something that I was looking for when I was a operations warehouse manager, was a resource to figure out what other things are out there. And highlighting that and bringing awareness to that, and then talking about how does it address some of these challenges that people are having in the supply chain. I think that's where we're trying to address some of those issues. And I think there's a lot of great things happening in the space too, from a technology standpoint. If you look at not only from systems perspective, but robotics, automation, trying to help close that gap, or not only close the gap of um, not having enough workers, but taking the workers that you have and making their day to day easier, more comfortable, and making them more productive without them working harder. And I think that's a really important thing, and we love to try and highlight that and bring some awareness to that.
Nice. So we you touched a little bit upon new technology in the industry. So this is actually going to lead on to the fourth question of what technology do you see having the most impact in the industry of supply chain, specifically in automation?
Ooh, what technology has the most impact in the industry from automation side? That's an interesting one. There's so many solutions out there right now. It's pretty mind blowing. But I think that if I look at automation specifically, for me, I mean, there's been a ton of automation when it comes to moving things around a warehouse, for example, right? Like whether it's conveyor, whether it's a mobile robot that's moving boxes or a pallet, or an automated forklift that's putting stuff away into a rack. There's been a ton of progress there, a lot of solutions around that. But I think right now we're seeing a lot of automation solutions come for the loading and unloading of trucks. And I think that is like a huge, huge win, because that is, I mean, if you look at the majority of containers that come from overseas, into the US, or, from one country to another, wherever it might be, they're not palletized, they're floor loaded, right? So we talk about floor loaded, it's, just straight up on the container floor, boxes stacked all the way to the top, right? Trying to maximize the cube in that container, and get as much product in there as possible, because it's most cost effective from a shipping standpoint, right? But then when it gets to a warehouse here, it needs to be unloaded. And if it's not on pallets, you can't really use a forklift to unload it. Um, so it becomes a manual unload, which is, as you can imagine, is can be very heavy. It's very repetitive, very prone to, like, long-term back injury, and those types of things. And so the automation of that, I think, is really, really important. And there's, let's see, I want to say it was at Modex, which is a huge conference for the material handling industry, warehouse industry, and there was at least six or seven solutions there now, that are trying to address this, and it's relatively new to the market, the idea of automating these processes, but there's a lot of companies doing it now, and I think it's going to become very, very important. I think that's, I would say, arguably, my opinion is that's probably one of the hardest tasks in the warehouse, is doing that unloading. You think about not only the unloading, but then you go in the container and think about if you're in Atlanta, for example, in the middle of the summer, and then side a container, with the sun beating down on it, is not only is it heavy, repetitive, but it's super hot too, right? So bringing automation into that is gonna, do a lot of different things. And actually, just recently, a company called, Fox Robotics, they just, announced that they did a deal with, Walmart, that's doing automation for unloading of trailers, palletized trailers. But still, I think that's a good sign of, this technology is going to be, pretty widespread.
Nice. So leading into the fifth question, and this is more of what you find to be the most interesting. So it would be, what is the most rewarding part of your job, and what do you look forward to every day going to work?
Mm, it's an interesting question. Let's see. Most rewarding. I think that the most rewarding, and what I've found, and I would say that if you told me this, 10, 15 years ago, um, I would say, like, I can't believe that's like the most rewarding thing to you. But I think is being able to educate people, on the industry, and what's happening. So I mean, it's very rewarding, I think, to be a professor, and, see students that are learning things, are interested in the material, having questions. Like yourself, Brandon. I know you asked a ton of questions in class, which was great. But I think even from the podcast side too, like, a lot of I've been going to a lot of conferences, a lot of trade shows within the last year and a half or so, and meeting people that listen to the podcast for the first time, and seeing them in person. And I've been hearing from a lot of the audience that, they're new to the industry, and they found the podcast, they listened to the podcast, and that's how they're learning about the industry. And I think that's the most rewarding, because, when I did the podcast, I was kind of almost in the same type of boat, right? And so, I did it for myself to learn, and now that, like, okay, I learned, but now I'm also created something where other people can learn too. I think that's the most rewarding, because, I think if somebody's learning from something, then that shows, like, there's real value there, and, like, you're really creating something valuable for people to help themselves, like, progress, whether it's professionally or personally.
Yeah, with that being said, time after time I've been told there's a certain point in one's career in which it's not about the little things such as it might be controversial, the money. It's more about who you influence and what whose lives you're gonna change in the long run. So I've heard countless times from many industry professionals that it's at a certain point it doesn't really become about the money, the raises you get, the promotions. It really becomes about how impactful can you make your impressions on other people to change their lives for the better and improve their career. And I feel like that's what's getting into when we talk about being creative, having podcasts, learning new things, influencing other people. So that was a really good point to cover. And
Yeah,
with that being, yeah,
I was gonna say, yeah, yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I think that uh I mean, we need money, right?
yeah,
We are a society that runs on money, but at the same time, I agree with you too. I mean, there is a point where you want to make an impact, like, beyond your own personal wallet, right? And I think there's a I wouldn't say a responsibility, but almost at some point, like, you feel like, okay, I've absorbed all this knowledge, but how do I, now pass that on in a way, right? Or how do I continue to learn, but then take those learnings and help other people learn too as well. And I think that's really become a rewarding part of my career and what I'm doing today.
nice. So as that wraps up all the questions, I'd like to thank you for sharing your valuable insights and expertise with us. Your responses have provided invaluable guidance for our listeners on their journey to success. And I'd like to conclude with how this that wraps up with episode 2 of the 15-minute coffee podcast with Brandon Salazar. We hope you enjoyed gaining insights from our guests and exploring the world of business with us. Don't forget to check out the podcast on our social media at the 15-minute coffee podcast on YouTube and Instagram for upcoming episodes. Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.